Almost missed it that time. I've been doing a thing where I give myself a little pat on the back every time I actually remember to hit record. Uh,
It's a good thing to do.
you know what? I haven't missed it yet, but it's a fear. So welcome to episode whatever of Stephen Has Questions. Um, and I still don't know how to pronounce your last name.
You know what? You're the second person to ask me that this week. It's McAnally. It's
Mac
the
and
I am the Irish version of that. McNally is the Scottish.
okay, cool. Well, I just wasn't sure if it was that, if there was some sort of anal in there, and I just didn't know if it work out.
Little everything. Hey, it was
But
a tough elementary school growing up with that name, but
yeah, I can imagine. I'm
what
actually
don't kill you makes you stronger, right?
I'm still vaguely cheesed because I wasn't pressing it when I was a kid. My birth name was Mando Domingo Ramos. And then when my mom got remarried, we changed it to that. And had I known that Mando would be a whole new thing when Mandalorian came out, I probably would have kept it, but not being pressed, I didn't know that. So now I just, I'm stuck
Funny.
with the name of someone I'm not even related to. So anyway, you do search engine optimization, and it's actually something you're really invested in, which sounds just totally something like I would never understand or think about. So this is
Well,
really cool.
I'll tell you, it's a space I've been doing this professionally for about 25 years now. So before kind of in the early days and before Google, and I guess a funny thing for you and me to talk about this is I actually kind of got into this in the days of mp3.com.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I remember, and it was actually just trial and error with bands I was in at the time. I started figuring out like, hey, if I put certain words on my profiles and stuff, and
Mhm.
just through trial and error, I could kind of rise up. And that time, if you remember that before Google, it was Hotbot and Lycos and AltaVista and things like this. And the web was pretty primitive in those days. Like you could make your text the same color as the background and it would grab that and show up.
Mhm.
And Google really kind of put that, what set Google apart and made it unique was rather than just rely on, going around the web, finding pages and seeing what text is on there, was looking at, well, who cites it? So like in your case, if you had a website for like Stoneburner and you link to Derision Cult, well, that link from Stoneburner, which is an industrial band, would make a lot more sense than if the public library in Keokuk, Iowa were to, and they started putting this logic to how the web worked. And that just so happened to correspond with me kind of getting a real job, and which at the time was server sales and web hosting, which is funny. There's another business that's kind of gone by the wayside, but I just kind of through trial and error, trying to make sales selling website hosting. Man, I'll bet if we show up on Google, we'd probably get some people that would make some sales. And so then I really got into that. This is like 2000 or so. And we had a lot of success with that, the company I was at. So much so, the owners have long since sold the company and everything. But I got some attention for it because at the time, there really wasn't an industry around search engine optimization. And so that also kind of coincided with some cool life events for me. I broke up with a college girlfriend, and I was living in Iowa at the time. And it just so happened, kind of out of the blue, a company I was trying to sell this as a service. What I was doing, I'd gotten featured in this web hosting article about what we were doing with ranking in Google, and it was kind of this new thing at the time. Like, look at these businesses that are making money without buying radio ads and things
Mhm.
like that, which was, back then that's how people thought.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I got recruited to come to this agency, and it meant moving to Chicago. And I just kind of took it as a sign, like my gut just told me I should do this. And so I did. And it's funny, I had visions of like, I'm going to move to Chicago. I'm going to just get way into the scene and, get into music. And life just kind of got in the way for me for a long time. It wasn't until I 10 years later that I really, started playing music again. But that led to a lot of opportunities to get into search. And, I started working with clients just like an agency.
Hmm.
And bounced around to a couple places. And eventually in 2004, I remember this. This was the year that more people bought Google ads than they bought radio. And it was like a big
Right,
cataclysmic
right.
event at the time. And Omnicom, who, that's a big ad agency holding company. There's Omnicom, Publicis, WPP, and I'm forgetting the other one. But, anyways, these big public companies, agencies, made this statement that they still felt like Google and all this was still sort of a fad, so they weren't going to really invest in it until, well, 2 years later, they bought the company I worked at. And they decided they're going all in on digital, and this is going to be the future. And so I got to kind of ride which was really cool for me because I went from working with just small businesses in the area, helping them get on the yellowpages.com and stuff to like now we were working with really big brands. At the time, Pepsi was a big client, a couple of the autos, Porsche and Mercedes, and did a lot. Lowe's, the hardware store, was a big one. And so I got to kind of get right in front of these brands. And that really is kind of where my passion for all this took off, because the other thing that was happening was the tools to optimize websites got more sophisticated and there was more data. And search, I look at search and this is like 2006 to today. What really excites me about is it is the search behavior and how people look for stuff is the most unfiltered window into like the soul of society.
Hmm.
And I really mean that. I'm not
Yeah,
being
yeah,
silly. I
absolutely.
really, it's like a giant focus group that never lies.
Hmm.
What people search for is undoubtedly, that's what the world wants. And Google happens to be the greatest arbiter of intent, with the sophistication of that algorithm known to man. So, back in the history of, mankind. So, like, that arbitration and understanding, okay, what do people want and what does Google think people want when they
Hmm.
look for that? That's kind of what I spend a lot of my time doing, is studying those interactions and helping businesses say, okay, here's the behaviors out there, here's the pain points, here's whatever it is, and here's how you can answer that in a way that the engines are going to respond to. Now, along the way in that career, there have been a lot of there's a lot of like hacking and stuff that goes on, like spamming Google. And
Hmm.
I've found myself in times where, early on in my career where I was doing that kind of stuff, but that's kind of a short game, because, especially with Google, if those results aren't quality, people are going to stop using it.
Right.
And, so winning results by like buying, spamming links and some of this stuff people probably think of when they think of SEO. I kind of got out of that game a long time ago just by virtue of the fact that
SEO.
it's hard to build a long term. But the thing that really drives me, and I think what ultimately is what makes this very valuable for businesses, is that having that market insight, like right on tap. And I found some really interesting things over. I was thinking about before we did this, some stories I could tell you about where that search behavior has been kind of integral to how we, shaped company strategy. One of the clients I worked on was McDonald's. And funny enough, this is also where I connected with Jim Marcus, because he was the creative director on that program for another Omnicom company. And this was around the time, let's see, this must have been like 2012. And McDonald's was going through an issue where, they'd kind of gotten beat up by Starbucks a little bit. It used to be like your grandparents would go and get their morning coffee at McDonald's, and that culturally had kind of changed. And they knew that, and they knew they had some things they had to change about the brand. They brought in a new CEO, and that CEO, Steve Easterbrook, was very like, we really got to be more digital as a company. Well, they tasked our agency with the big plan at the time was, you might remember this when they came out with the 3 different Big Macs, and they brought like breakfast back where you could get it all day long for a
Yeah, yeah, I
while.
know that. Hmm.
Well, one of the things that they tasked us with is like, well, we want to make that, how do we drive traffic to our Big Mac websites and stuff? And typical SC. I mean, there's a lot of, I guess I skipped over a big part, but there's a lot of technical things like making sure tags say the right side, make sure, when can a search engine even crawl and see what's on your site? I mean, those are things that are kind of table stakes in this. But also, kind of in researching, one of the things we found was there's 2 stories on this. No one gives a shit how many calories are in a Big Mac, or
Hmm.
what they care
Yeah,
a
you want a Big
lot.
Mac, you want a Big Mac, and that's what
Well,
the
what
heart
they
wants,
do
what the
care
heart wants.
about, what people do look for, is they want to figure out how to make that secret sauce. And there is a huge audience of that. In fact, that audience is very centered in, believe it or not, and this is what's so cool about this data now, the biggest searches for that tended to be in urban areas,
Hmm.
because there was sort of a hipster thing going on with it in like Brooklyn and stuff.
Hmm.
So the original plan, my team, what we took to McDonald's was, hey, if you really want to make some noise about this, you should publish that recipe. And they didn't go for that, but what they did do is bottle it and sell it on the website. And they got so much press for that. And it was when it really kind of led the it ended up being one of the biggest product launches McDonald's has ever had. And the other thing that happened is they're asking us to help them solve this problem with people not wanting to get coffee there anymore. That aspect of it had gone away. And so we did a lot of research on what can search tell us about what people want.
Hmm.
Now you gotta remember this is like 2012. But what we learned is there's not a lot. There was twice as many people then searching for Wi-Fi near me as there was coffee near me.
Right.
And at the time, McDonald's had launched Wi-Fi in all the restaurants in the UK, but they
Hmm.
hadn't done it in the US. They just, it was for no other reason than they just didn't see it as a whatever. So we brought that to them and said, if you really want to start getting that crowd that just wants to come in and hang out, Wi-Fi is where it's at. And that insight did lead to they did bring Wi-Fi to all the restaurants in the country, but it was based on that search behavior that drove that. But there's been a lot of really cool stories like that in where I feel like we really have a pulse on sort of what people want. And I'm working on, these days, I do a lot more with B2B. And there's a lot of reasons for that I talk about in
What do you mean by that?
business to business. So I do, like, a lot of my projects now have to do with like selling software to companies.
Hmm.
So it's a much more kind of rational sale, because when people are looking for software, they're looking to solve a problem. And
Hmm.
so I spend a lot of my time doing that. I'm helping a company right now that they sell grant management software. So, like, if you're a foundation, you have to have something that can manage all the tens of thousands of people trying to apply for money and grants. And so they sell the software that manages that process. And right now, what the part of the phase I'm in right now is, what are those pain points that would cause somebody in that world who's just maybe doing that with spreadsheets right now and isn't thinking about buying a product to automate this? Well, one of the things we found is that a big thing people search for is understanding the impact. Like, hey, we gave all this money out. What in the hell did we get for it?
Right.
Well, that's a big thing that the software can do.
Hmm.
And it automates it, and it takes like what might be like 3 days worth of research and turns it into 10 minutes worth of work for these companies. So now we're leaning in on that because that's a key pain point because people don't just go search grant management software.
Right.
It's all these ancillary things that lead to that behavior. So I've been helping them kind of triangulate that. There's that. They tend to kind of get into the funnel or get into wanting to talk about this stuff when audit times happen.
Hmm.
So anytime a state, and you can time this, like I watch this when states change their regulations on how those foundations need to like report what they gave out, because there's a lot of strict rules around that. you just see suddenly people starting to search for those rules. So we need to get a lot more on top of getting in front of those, writing like blog posts on how to manage that stuff, so we can, rank, people click on us, and then now we can start to talk about selling a product to them. But those kinds of things are really interesting to me.
Need grant software that will find grants for me and then fill all that shit out. Just from
Well, there
that point of
is, I'll
view.
send you, there's a company called Instrumental that they just spun off, and that's what it does. Yeah, if you have like a foundation, if you have like a nonprofit or something, you're just trying to pitch
I mean,
grants.
just for like art, art grants and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there are a few players that do that. Those are grant seekers. We're on
Hmm.
the grant giver business, but yeah, for sure. It's funny. I've learned in the last 3 months just how massive of a business of a ecosystem that is. The foundations versus the seekers. But I used to do a lot of in my kind of the big agency days, I did a lot more with the B2C stuff.
Hmm.
And I kind of got out of it because, or a big reason I kind of got disenfranchised from that is that starts to feel a little manipulative, or it started to, when like
Hmm.
brands really wanted to get in front of political hot button
Right.
issues. I was part of helping Audi get, when they ran the campaign for this is around the time the Me Too stuff was getting really big, and they wanted to kind of get in front of that. And now the thing is, Audi, what they're really selling to is the men who want to have these cars and be seen as, hey, I'm pretty cool, sensitive guy. They're not really out there selling, and they can look at who their buyers are. But it felt
Yeah,
there was
that's
a lot of that.
a really weird thing to jump on to try and sell a car. Or
Well, what they
same
want to do
thing.
is position it like, hey, if I have an Audi, hey, I'm a pretty sensitive,
Yeah, no, I
I'm
get
a
it. It's
guy who, and but
yeah.
a lot, we did the same thing with Nike. When Colin Kaepernick read the when they had the anniversary for the shoe, and they used him, and they knew all along they were going to create this uproar with conservative
Hmm.
people, but they wanted that because they knew who they were trying to sell the shoes to were
Right,
young liberals. And
right,
so
sure.
my job in that mix was to, like, identify the certain, how are people searching and finding things, and like what were the patterns around how people were looking for Colin Kaepernick as it related to Nike. We'd feed that back into the team, and they would buy ads against it and stuff. And I'm not, I mean, those kinds of behaviors have gone on since the dawn
Oh,
of
sure. Yeah.
advertising. But when you're kind of just toying with people's emotions like that, yeah, the room gets a little hip for me. And so that's why I like B2B, is because this is very rational stuff,
Right.
like, do you have a problem? Can we solve it?
Yeah.
And so I've spent the last like 5 years, that's kind of been where that's the kind of work I do now. And I enjoy it. But I really get passionate about, like I said, the search behavior thing and what's happening now. I was talking to you a little bit with what's going on with AI
Hmm.
in search. So you've probably seen this when you do a Google search, and now
Yeah,
you
yeah.
get that AI overview, and well, these things are starting to have opinions about brands and
Hmm.
opinions about stuff. And what I'm finding myself getting asked to help brands a lot with is, how do we influence that? Like, I had a car brand that will tell you off camera, but and then sort of treading back into B2C here, but what happens when you ask if this brand,
Right.
how much does it cost to fix them? And that AI overview comes back, they're notoriously expensive compared
Right.
to, this is, search engines are doing this
Hmm.
now. And brands are starting to realize, like, hey, we've got, what do we do? We can't have our search engine saying we suck.
Right.
And so they're coming to me, and so my job in that is like, well, let's backpedal. Where did that thing get its citations? What is it deeming is an expert or something that it's going to cite? And we're building plans and inroads and working. And I work with like PR firms to, like, where do we need to build the different, in, or how do we make sure our content's what's getting cited? Like in the grant thing. If you look for stuff around impact measurement, it cites one of my client's biggest competitors,
Hmm.
and according to so and so, blah blah, you should do this. Well, how do we get to where we're the source for that?
Oh, really?
And those are really interesting new things. I think this concept of AI, the engine itself determining who the winners and losers are going to
Mhm.
be is versus you kind of discerning that on your own.
So, well, I guess the ultimate question is how accurate is it?
Well, that's a good question. So, one of the things I've been studying, particularly with Google, is what industries it's deploying these right now. And I'm rattling this off because I just was working on this data for a keynote in a couple of weeks. Right now, about 80% of healthcare queries actually have those AI overviews. And
Hmm.
you might remember like last May, they were having issues with Google was telling people, "Hey, you should stare at the sun."
Yeah.
Well, the problem with that was they didn't have the algorithm dialed into like who it needs to consider as trusted sources. So it was pulling things from like Reddit and
Hmm.
comments people are making. That really dropped off in about the middle of June. And the biggest sources now that those AI overviews are going to cite is the Mayo Clinic, NIH, and Cleveland Clinic.
Hmm.
So, and those are big sites. I mean, those things have millions of pages. I mean, they publish all their whatever doctor stuff on there. So those have gotten a lot more accurate. And what I think is interesting about that is, healthcare is, it's really interesting to me that 80% of healthcare queries, I mean, you can ask it, Nick, you know, it says a lot to me that Google would go into an industry like that and present those. Believe it or not, the smallest one I see is entertainment. I only see those about 9% of the time with the queries that I track that Google's going to want to trigger one of those. It doesn't trigger them on e-commerce much. So like if you're looking for how to buy something, and the reason for that's simple. They don't monetize that. They want you to see that product carousel with everything. So the last thing you want to do is take up space on the screen with this AI overview. So I'm seeing them react that way, but I'm seeing the finance ones, like asking financial questions.
Hmm.
Those started out with about 1% when Google rolled this out in May, and they're about 12 now. And if I forecast that out, probably about 1 in 3 finance queries, like what's the best bank, if I want to get a car loan, what should I, that kind of stuff. You'll see that about 1 in 3 searches. But it's also really interesting with all the emerging engines that are coming up, pretty much since I got into this. Google became the predominant player in like 2005. Before that, it was Yahoo. And they pretty well own 90% of the market this whole entire time since then. There have been like supposed Google killers that have emerged here or there, and they kind of die on the vine. But just this last year, when ChatGPT rolled out that search extension, I don't know if you remember that, but in December, now you can go to ChatGPT and it can search the web. They went into that with a user install base of 300 million people, so it's a hell of a way to get into a business when you have that many people already using your product. But for the first time, Google dipped below 90% of the market share. That was in February. So they have about 88, 89 right now. But you have to remember 1% of the search market's $1 billion.
Hmm.
So we're talking about huge movement here. So it's really exciting that's happening. And I think that experience with search, or the experience that like ChatGPT offers you, is the first time I think this is like a really legitimate benefits the user thing.
Hmm.
The reason I say that is because when you do a Google search, and those AI overviews, they do a good job of turning one search into what you can do in 5
Right.
because it's focusing on the follow ups you might have and all that.
Mhm.
Well, with the search or with a chat function like Chat GPT or Claude or Perplexity, you can have a conversation with it. So you can
Right.
ask your follow ups and it can remember it and it can recall. And those kind of experience. This is the first time we've ever had you.com was the first engine to launch that does that. and that was in 2017. But you probably never used Steve.com. And it wasn't very good. The generative AI at that point was very, very basic. But because of that, I think we really may see an era where people, use different engines. I hosted a webinar on the 5th of March, and I had about 400 people on there, and I just surveyed how many engines AI powered things do you use in a week? And 60% of those people said they're using more than one. And 20% of them said they use three or more, like ChatGPT, Perplexity, AI, Google's AI. So I think that's really telling because, it was kind of Google's world and everyone else lived in it for a long time. And we're seeing that change. So I think it's going to be really interesting that we're moving into an environment where the engine forms the opinions and, recommendations for you. And as an SEO guy, what I get excited about is, well, that really makes what we do mission critical, because we do a lot of reverse engineering around like, well, how did the AI arrive at that conclusion? How people search is still, absolutely key. And I am seeing people are getting more conversational, and like the actual search strings we see now are getting longer and longer. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of cool because it also reveal more about what you want. And I like that because, somebody searching for men's shoes doesn't tell me much, but what are the latest men's shoe fashions? And if I'm seeing, hey, 20% more people are looking for fashion this quarter than they were last quarter, that says something about the behaviors and the interests of the population, and, what that means for a marketer is if I've spent all my time bragging about how functional my shoe is or how long it lasts, and the world is starting to pay a lot more attention to fashion, that's an insight that goes beyond just ranking in Google.
Absolutely.
That's a product insight. So that in a nutshell is what I do, but that's what really gets me excited about it is just, I've always been kind of a data nerd, and this is about as cool of a sandbox as you can get as far as seeing how people find things and all that.
That's cool. I have when ChatGPT first came out, I was thinking about this a lot, and I had this immediate realization of a fear, which was this idea that, okay, so Wikipedia always has to cite sources.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot about disinformation and how I was reading a book, I don't remember which one, but basically there were kind of like a couple of years ago, the number of fake news sites started to outnumber actual news sites online.
Oh, wow. I believe it.
And I was thinking about how it wouldn't take that much I don't know how to do it, but it seems like it wouldn't take that much for, say, like Wikipedia always has to cite sources, right? But so if you were let's say you wanted to push the idea that vaccines are bad, it probably wouldn't take all that much to set up an AI that its job is to go out, buy domains and manufacture sites specifically for this one thing, almost on the fly. Like you could pick any subject and, as the search numbers reached a certain threshold for it, you could be like, oh, do one-sided pink widgets cause cancer? Nobody really gives a shit until it gets up to like, X number a day. And when that thing breaks, the sites that are built for the AI recognizes that's happening and then manufactures a whole shitload of sites saying what it wants you to say, which then can get cited through all of these things. That's terrifying to me.
Yeah.
That's
well, so couple things on that. That is 100% a concern that Google actually they've published some research papers on this, and in 2022, August 2022, ChatGPT launched in December. They rolled out a very cleverly called up algorithm update called the helpful content update. And what it was designed to do, and kind of the logic of how you approach something like that, is still using that link concept. Like, that's great. And what you're describing is called programmatic SEO, where you basically just do SEO with the program. And a lot of companies will do that, where they'll just pump out millions and millions of pieces of content, and then suddenly it looks like there's a crowd there that really doesn't exist. One of the sites that actually got popped for that, and this is in the press, so I'm not saying anything out of turn, is bankrate.com. Built a whole ton of content around that, where they were just flooded. They weren't trying to do anything, like you're talking about but the point of it's the same.
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah.
Hey, well, what if we just programmatic, and they would use AI to generate these pages and pump this out. Google saw this coming before ChatGPT came out. So they launched that helpful content update. And there's really kind of two core elements of that I think kind of address this. One is and by the way, the natural language processing on that algorithm is like, I mean, these are like the best guys in the world build this stuff for Google. But they're very good and meticulous at seeing, do these words and these sequences, are we seeing them somewhere else? And is it derivative of something? So anytime they're matching, determining if a source is acceptable, they've got the language built in where they can kind of tell if it was.
So they're comparing and contrasting to determine if something is.
That's right. If something is. And the wording that they used, I'll have it right in front of me, but the way they describe it is whatever this content, is it actually adding something unique to what we already know about? And so what you run into, where this kind of stops the programmatic stuff dead in its tracks, is if it's just variations on the same thing, this algorithm can detect that.
Right.
And so that really filters a lot of that out. Google has had a long-standing policy against duplicate content. I mean, this goes back to 2000s.
Right. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. Don't just say Stephen Archer over and over and over, and then expect this thing to rank for. So there's those fundamentals. But that helpful content update, Google makes about 3 big tweaks to that every year. And in fact, we're going through one right now. They just announced one on Monday, and that's just kind of goes to show that this is not kind of a one and done thing. I mean, it's a constant.
I can't.
Google, Google does about several spam updates a year, even still. But the big thing with that is, can they determine if this is actually adding anything? Is it derivative from somewhere? There's an acronym that Google, whenever they, their webmaster blog, whenever they talk about like how to determine if something's worthy of ranking, the acronym is EAT, and that stands for expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And they added another E on, so I guess it's E now, which is experience. And basically with that, and that has to do with the actual experience of the page. Like, does this thing load quick? Does it demonstrate? And then they're looking for, does this content demonstrate that it's an expert in something? So like, you could write content about industrial music and stuff, and Google has enough to go on to see, okay, Stephen Archer's an expert in that. If Stephen Archer decided to write a blog about all you need to know about claims adjusting or something like that, it would take a long time for you to demonstrate that you're an expert in that field. And that's why you're seeing things like, like when I mentioned the NIH and Cleveland Clinics and all that, like you started to see that, like that's the algorithm siphoning off. There's a book called In the Plex that sort of describes the it's a little older now, but describes how Google thinks about all this stuff. They kind of a myth I think people have is that Google goes in, just removes pages from search results and stuff. They approach everything algorithmically. So rather than there have been instances where they do remove things if it's like legal, or illegal. But the approach is always to see, can they tweak the algorithm so the algorithm itself pulls it out? Because that solves like that basically makes it. So what you're seeing is those updates to the helpful content to kind of mitigate those things. But It is interesting to watch this because I'm seeing sites that did a lot of that programmatic stuff. Not necessarily in the case like you're saying of
Right, right. But yeah,
vaccines, but you're seeing them kind of taper off, especially in the last 6 months. Because and I kind of this kind of goes back. I'm kind of a white hat guy when it comes to all this stuff. I look at it more like what's right for the user and the business, and
hmm
so I would much rather find those specific ways we can make a connection with somebody based on something they want. Let's just build something that meets the needs. Um, the bad news of that is if you just want to rank really quickly and you don't give a shit if you're there in a month, I'm probably not your guy, you know. But I'm okay with that. But
yeah.
anyways, I think to your point, that is absolutely something that's been considered. I think that helpful content update is going to be key
Mhm.
for that. I think it is going to make it difficult for emerging players who don't have the capital to build an algorithm like that.
Mhm.
So, for example, DeepSeek, I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's the Chinese
Mhm.
version
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
ChatGPT. Um, I've been testing that a lot. There's a term hallucinations, which
Mhm.
basically means it just starts saying gibberish.
Yeah.
You're seeing ones like that do that, and part of it is, and part of it has to do with kind of the way that DeepSeek goes about finding information, and part of it has to do with it's actually really freaking tough to build a big index of the web and retrieve data in a
Mhm.
meaningful way. That's really a big reason why there haven't been Google competitors because
Yeah. It's just
there's a
so.
reason they have data centers all over the place, and that, that they require so much. They're always building these processors that are bending time and space or whatever I'm reading about now. But it's because of that. I mean, it's very, very trillions and trillions of pages to be able to retrieve them in a meaningful way at once. These emerging players are finding the that's not the hard, that's not the easy part.
Right. Um, so this is only tangentially related, but you might have some insight into this. There is the ongoing debate, since they will never say, does Facebook listen to you through your phones while you're looking at it or whatever?
Yeah.
And so we were talking about that. And when that came up, I started monologuing, or no, it wasn't even that. It's like, I think, I don't know, I was just riffing on this idea one time and our phones were here. And it's like, you know what we need? We need Crocs for men, like a whole shoe line, Crocs for men. And I just kept talking about Crocs for men, Crocs for men, Crocs for men. 2 days later, I started seeing ads on Facebook for types of shoes that I would never look for. I've never looked for in my life for men. It was it's one of the very few times where I've had one of those moments of okay, I tend to think that's just paranoid bullshit, but like here's an actual thing, and I can't
Yeah.
think of any reason that this would be doing this other than that.
Did you saw that ad on Google or did you see it on
It's on
Amazon?
Facebook specifically.
Oh, Facebook.
Hmm
They might. I don't have any experience with Facebook's algorithm doing that.
hmm
However, I have. I can name the name. I was involved in a project with State Farm about 10 years ago, like right when Alexas were coming out,
hmm
to actually trigger ads based. And that might be what Facebook. Did you happen to have an Alexa
I don't
around when
have
you
an
were?
Alexa.
Okay.
Mm.
Well, I will tell you there are ad formats that will trigger off that stuff.
hmm So
And
there
now,
are they are listening.
yes.
Yeah, the algorithms are listening.
Well, yeah, the ad formats are. The way that works is, and this is what's getting advertisers are getting a little annoyed about this because in order to do that stuff, and maintain what compliances are involved kind of get over my head, but all that's got to be a black box as far as the advertiser is concerned. So somebody must have been out there selling Crocs for men,
Hmm
and they, you know, told Facebook, "Hey, here's the product that we're advertising." Facebook says, "Okay, we'll show that to people that are interested in Crocs for men." As an advertiser, you might be like, well, who are those people? What are they searching on? Well, they can't tell you that. And
Right.
that's so, but I do know at least with Alexa, that technology was designed, whereas, anytime people are talking about car insurance, we can re-trigger a State Farm ad
Hmm.
so they'll, see it. But we don't know that that's lock and key stuff.
Right.
So I do believe, I mean, yeah, the devices are listening for, words and stuff, but whether there's people sitting there
Oh, I
scanning to
would
see
assume
what you're
there's
saying and
access
all
to
that.
that, but it is listening, I guess is my point.
Yes. Yep. And I think there's a new ad format called Performance Max. That's, I guess, a couple of years old now that Google rolled out where you can, it's cool from the standpoint, like if it works as advertised, it's a pretty sweet thing where you just plug in, hey, I want to sell, this flavored water and I want to have a 20% margin on it and I've got 10,000 bucks. And that's literally it. Then Google takes that, generates ads, figures out where to show, like, do I show that to email? Do I run search? The concept's really cool. But part of how it's gathering that intel, they've definitely, when they kind of wrote the patents for how to run that stuff, they do talk about listening devices and things like
Mhm.
that. So I can infer from that like, well, there's probably androids in the mix and
Right.
things. It's funny you mentioned Meta because I don't have firsthand experience with them, but I can't imagine they're in something similar. I'm just thinking, what device would they be using that you would be listening on, unless it hooks into Google's ad network or something like that.
Mhm.
But yeah, those things happen. It's funny because I'm probably like, I'm one of these guys where I've got like, I don't even want to say the names of these devices because they're going to start talking to me while I'm on here. But I've been a total kind of dummy about that stuff. I just, but again, I'm like, I don't say anything all that scandalous, but I do know how the stuff works. Or I do know that at least on those there are ad formats, but
Mhm.
it's kind of hard where it's really kind of becoming where that kind of stuff's really starting to squeeze the industry is these big ad holding companies because a lot of the and advertisers, like if you sell Crocs, it's like, well, shit, if this is going to get as simple as I just tell Google, here's how much money I got, here's what I'm selling, here's how much I want to make, what in the hell do you need a person for?
Right.
Like, well, why do you need to have an agency? Like, that's all being, and that in a way, I think that's sort of the dynamic in that business right now. And so those agencies are fighting with the tech supplier or those tech providers. And I'm sure there's government lobbying getting involved to try to stop them. But
Well,
yeah,
I am
it's
more.
creating some interesting dynamics as far as, I mean, that's job plate replacement for real,
Right. Yeah.
And I watched that go on in the last decade where, you really don't need somebody researching, you know, where you should be placing ads if the AI is going to do it for you.
So I just had this very cool moment of I was watching you talk and I was listening to you, and as you were saying, yeah, you don't need people researching, and then you kind of pause for a second, and I guess I don't know if you're using the OBS bot, but whatever auto camera you're using, it zoomed in to you on this very
Oh,
like, I don't know who's listening, like it was
well, you know what?
zooming in for the big reveal.
I'm actually, this is a new iPad I got that I'm
Oh
on.
wow.
And I've noticed it.
Huh, I
It's
wonder
funny.
who.
You're like the third person I've used this, and it does do these Zoom things.
Yeah, but it's also panning a little bit. Like that's
Yeah.
cool. I've got a little, well, I guess it's in the garage now, but I've got a little OBS bot camera that has its own gimbal, and it will
Oh, right on.
around. Yeah. Um, so you were talking, and I think about because of the art thing, I think about the collective subconscious thing a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
And as people who have been watching this series will know, as I bring this up often, when I think about making art, my space cakey analogy is always that the ideas always all live out in this platonic ideal, out in the collective subconscious up there, and your job is to bring them through without fucking them up. And
Yeah.
thinking about that recently, just with the idea that like we all have this agreed language that we use, like trying to figure out the best way to explain it. Three different people all at once come up. Three different people all at once start. I'm going to start pushing one-sided pink widgets because and they'll do it completely independently, almost like out of nowhere. But because of this idea of this collective subconscious, somewhere there's this that happens for a reason. Like there's a series of
Mm,
shadows of ideas that different people online may talk about that are all kind of driving thought that ends up kind of with like like wow, more and more of these kinds of things are being talked about completely independently. Somebody will go, hey, I could make a video game based on this or write a book based on this or whatever. And one of the things I was thinking about when I'm a for an independent artist, I'm a big advocate of the use of AI with art because it's a fantastic tool for idea development, rapid
mhm.
prototyping, things like that. Like I use it all the time. If I get a commission and somebody's like, "Hey, I want X, Y, and Z," and I'm like, "Okay, well, and then I'll use that to rapidly go, here's 20 different versions with these ideas
Sure.
you've got," instead of me sitting there and sketching all of it out. Um, and one of the things I think is really interesting, it's changing a little bit, but for a decent amount of time, let's say if you said to Midjourney, a warrior woman wearing all black, whatever, a beautiful warrior woman wearing all black,
Hmm.
it rendered 20 different versions. Almost all of them would have the same face, or a real similar set of fairly specific
Hmm.
features. And it got me really thinking about how, okay, so like if you were to ask Midjourney to do an image of a painting, doesn't matter what, landscape, whatever, and it will often do a great job. And often it will have some sort of like signature type thing on it. And people were using that as a see, they're stealing specifically from real artists.
Hmm.
That's what that's. And it's like, no, it's not. It's just that it thinks that the signature, having a signature there, is part of the thing. Like it's
Right.
asking for something, and that's what it thinks it's part of. Um, so I was thinking about how the renders created by these AIs really do accurately depict in this weird way that collective subconscious. Like if you, because it is this average idea, average image of what we all collectively agree is beautiful, because every person who has requested that, they're picking the ones that resonate with them that work. So, and I'm sure it
Right.
remembers that. And so it's taking all of that data of like, okay, out of these 20,000 people, they all picked these features that look
Hmm.
like this. Therefore, this is beautiful. Like this is the average universal, of what beauty is at this moment. Also, I think
Hmm.
doing this Hanukkah thing, but
Yeah.
so I think that that's really interesting. I
Yeah.
that's
Well, one thing I can tell you a little bit about that is, and by the way, I think your idea of the collective conscious and having an antenna up, that's outside of search and AI. I think the same way, and there's some really fascinating like examples in architecture where tribes 10,000 years ago would have built something one way, and like on the other side of the earth, you see
right,
the exact same things, and
right.
I was just watching a podcast about that, or just a YouTube video. But one of the things with that DeepSeek kind of brought to this party was this idea of transparency. You should check this out, by the way. I think this would translate to how the AI would process art too, but they're big on transparency. And so they have their deep search. When you search, I don't know if you played with it, you can
No.
see a deep search. Well, I think it says deep search, and it actually shows you how it's processing and arriving at answers.
Hmm.
And so it says, if you say, what are the best, my favorite query, because I'm trying to convince my wife to let me get one, is what's the best gas powered RC car that, and you could see it. It rations through. Well, if the person wants this, if it has the data on where I live, well, he lives in Chicago, so he's, and you just watch it think through. But one of the things I've noticed it does, and this is a research project I'm doing, is I've got about 10,000 queries I'm hitting it on to find the common patterns. So,
Mhm.
like, what are the things that this thing always, well, it always looks for consensus.
Mhm.
So it's always looking to see, and I imagine this exists in art too, or in visuals, but it's going to look to see, well, is it, okay, I saw 20,000 or however many websites seem to mention these 10 brands. Now zooming in on those, well, I saw 10 really good reviews here and only 2 bad ones, but I saw 10 bad ones here and only 2 here. And you can just watch it go through how it logically arrives, and it checks itself. It goes, oh, but wait, if I say this, I got to refer back to he lives in Chicago and they only sell that thing in Japan. So let's not show him that one. Um, but that process, I think probably, I don't know of any Gen AI tools that do that for visual, but that logic is pretty common across them. So now, and the reason I know that is because immediately OpenAI started doing the same thing, so you could see so one of the things I think might be causing that, or tapping into that collective conscious, is all of the way that Gen AI tends to kind of its thought process works is it's always looking for consensus.
Mhm.
And so to your point about, well, where is it seeing commonalities and what beauty is? And it might see, oh, of all these pictures I've looked at, they all seem to have this kind of jawline,
Right, exactly. Yeah.
or the ones that, and they all, when you were talking about the writings, well, there must be something like that.
Mhm.
I can tell you when it tries to answer a query, that's the thought process that I've seen at least OpenAI and DeepSeek go through. And it's just a matter of time until the rest of them start doing that, because everybody's freaking out about transparency with this stuff. But I think that idea of a consensus is cool. But what's cool about that is if you think about what that's really a proxy for, that kind of is to your point, that is almost kind of like a proxy to that collective
Right.
conscious. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
hey, this AI is combing through tens of thousands of images,
This
and
is the
it's
average of
finding,
all of this. Yeah.
yeah, and it's saying, hey, people that seem to be calling this image beautiful,
Mhm.
I've seen 10,000 instances where they all have this one characteristic, or they have these 3. And then, okay, well, if I'm going to draw this for Steven, it's got to have this kind of nose, and it's got to have this jaw, or whatever. It would be applying the same thing it does to answering a query if it were to draw a picture like that. And it's interesting when you really think about how much processing power it takes to do all this stuff. Like, man, no wonder there's, we're talking about energy and, the need for. Have you heard about this chip Google made that supposedly proves the multiverse because of how fast it crunches? And
No, although I did hear that they managed to get nuclear fission going for like 20 minutes or something like that.
yeah. And
So,
but
hey.
that stuff's, they're gonna have to figure all that out if we keep
Mhm.
going down this route, because like, think of all the ways it's, if it's gonna find that consensus for, and DeepSeek has 300 million users. OpenAI is at 500 million at this point. Google's well into the billions. Like, yeah, it's that's a whole other kettle of fish. But that's like a big part of this, is how do you power all this? But at any rate, I do think that consensus thing, that is a lot of those models. That's one of the first things I see they always do, and then they start trying to, at least the searches I've done, they'll start trying to figure out what they can discern about you that would cause it to need to disqualify things. Like, I see, like, then it'll, throw out RC cars that, like, well, he can't buy that if he lives in Chicago, so let's not show him that one. Or, this one's is only for, these don't use gas that he can buy where he lives, so let's not show him that, that kind of stuff. But that same concept would apply probably to any medium.
Commercial time. So when Stoneburner started out, it was based on this idea of what would dance music on a rack sound like. So I did 6 records plus some EPs and basically a ton of that material. And then got tired of it, which is why Stonebear turned into this other thing. And it's been 8 years or so, and thought it'd be kind of fun to go and revisit that style of music. So I've recently started up a project called going under the name Christ Knife that is essentially all of that stuff with a few new things added to it. And you can find all of that at christknifearrakis.com. So if you're into kind of tribal dance music, yeah, it's probably your thing. So please check that out. It's out on Wolfcore Records, my little label. I think what's interesting is, there's been a lot of talk lately about how, well, talk, but there have been articles written about how people who use certain AI tools tend to start to lose critical thinking skills or not use them as
Yeah.
much. There was another article that came out recently on Slashdot, I think, and it was talking about how the areas that are most using the AI writing tools are actively lower education. So
Hmm.
now what's really interesting about that is we've got these tools and they're actively working on people are using them to compensate for things. Uh,
Sure.
so one of the things I noticed a while back, some I saw somebody put a painting up, and I was sitting there staring at it, and I was like, that may actually be a physical painting, but there is no doubt in my mind that they used an AI reference for it. Just like clearly the artist is very, very good because they managed to nail all of these AI features that are beautiful,
Right.
And so for what's interesting to me is that as an artist, if you're going to use these tools, you have to really own them. Like be aware of that problem. Like, okay, yes, this is this average idea.
Yes.
Now if I look at that and you do a painting of it, I'm going to know exactly where that came from, and that breaks that barrier down for me. I am no longer seeing it as a painting. I am seeing it as a painting that you did of an AI picture. Like, so I am no
Hmm.
longer objective with that. I do a lot of sampling, and by a lot, I mean obscene amount of sampling. And I use that to build entire songs very, very fast. Like I can knock out like the basics for 4 or 5 songs in a few hours by just knowing how all my samples work and using those and kind of going, okay, well, that part works here, 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 and that changed
Yeah.
this other part. And then I might go back and replace them. Um, and one of the flip side of that is I have always straight up said, I was like, if you figure out where something I'm sampling came from, I didn't do my job right. Like, because by the time I am done with it, it should be, like I should have, bang fondled and masturbated it so much that like it's all you're hearing is the song. You're not here.
Yeah.
If you look at, say, a band goes on stage and they've got all these clips of all these horror movies they're playing, right? Instead of paying attention to the band, you're going, oh, I know that movie, I know that movie, I know that movie. Like you're losing the entire point of doing it because it's not no longer adding to what you're doing. It is taking that away.
Yeah. That's so funny. Sean Payne and I were talking about it would be because we do, and especially with cyanotic music, I mean,
Mhm.
it is sci-fi horror based, and those some of those call outs for movie samples are intent, like they want
Right, of course.
to.
Well, that's a
But
different thing.
we
That's
thought
like an aesthetic.
we thought it'd be funny to make a video like remember the old VH1 pop up videos?
Mhm.
Like play your video, but
Yeah.
pop up in the song where the samples are from. One of these days we'll do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I kind of did that with when I did Sellout, and in the bridge of it, it's got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and it just go up on the screen. It just goes. It's like, thankfully, no one's ever used these samples before, or something like that, and then it cuts to a sample from Aliens. Um, but yeah, so I mean, it's definitely one of those things where you can use they're great tools for that stuff, but it's definitely you need to recognize as an artist like if you're
Yes.
going to use them. That's cool, but everybody also knows what these things look like now. So it's not magic. If
Well,
you do it too closely, it will blow it.
yeah. Well, one thing And I agree with you 100%. In fact, I've read the same study that like it's I think Microsoft is the one that found people's cognitive abilities are kind of there's a noticeable decline.
Mhm.
One of the things I'm finding myself having to be really careful with is I my biggest use case for AI is data. Or yeah, I will use it to comb through tens of thousands of keywords and help me find the patterns and cluster things and just that kind of just data analysis. Well, prior to, and my favorite model is Claude. That's the one I like to use. It's kind of tuned for that. Well, prior to that, what I've learned about myself, and I think this is true for art too, there's kind of an ambient inherent knowledge I get from just sitting there filtering stuff in spreadsheets and like having to really kind of try a few things that don't work and like, you know, and so when I present and talk about that data, I have this like ambient inherent knowledge of it and I feel a lot more confident,
Mhm.
you know. Whereas if I'm using AI and it gets everything and I can QA and it's right, I can present it, but it's kind of like I'm just reading sheet
Right.
music, you know. And
Mhm.
I wonder if that. So I found myself having to be careful that I don't overuse or that I'm still
Mhm.
in there because I think the way I work, I need to kind of crunch data, screw it up a couple times, and like
Yeah.
then I can talk to you about it in a meaningful way. And I think people, you're absolutely right. People need to be aware of that because what's going to happen is, especially like with what I do, if I look like this data scientist guy, but then somebody asks the second or third question and I'm kind of stuck flat footed because it's like, well, I use ChatGPT to,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
then it's
Yeah.
like, and I think that's a problem. But I think on your that same kind of dynamic exists in art too, where is that really a guy playing guitar? Or is that an AI iteration of it? And can you take the concepts you built on this one piece and expand it further? In a human, meaningful way. Um, if you're just doing with AI, because I think art's the same way. I mean, you really to construct a song. I think we've all been there. Sometimes mixes don't work and you got to kind of go, those mistakes have as much impact on what the
Oh, yeah.
output is
Mhm.
is getting it right. And I think that's the part that you can shortcut with AI, that getting this pristine finished thing. I used to have a guitar teacher that told me that the best thing anybody could do, and when I was learning guitar when I was a little kid, is he just hates the fact DAWs exist because he always thought 4 tracks are the best key to becoming a great arranger. Because if you got 4 tracks and you got to figure out how to bounce and you got to make and commit to decisions, you are going to be by virtue just a better arranger. And I can't say I've heeded his advice, but I think it's very, very sound.
Well, I mean, our first demos that eventually got released by Metropolis were all done on a 4 track, and
Yeah.
or like and our first record, Dragonfly, that was all done. It was recorded to computer, but it was all live sequencing with an MMT8 through a mixer,
Oh wow, that's cool.
and then we overdub the vocals or the guitar or whatever. And if you fucked up, like there's one of the songs on Dragonfly where the kick was too quiet, and I had to sit there and manually play that kick into because we were using Core Pro because
Oh,
we
man.
weren't able to sync
I
anything.
remember that. Yeah, cool
Yeah,
at it.
and so like I am I definitely, I still have my Juno, my sampler. Like my sampler was our DAW because what I would do is like I had used the Juno run through an effects processor, sample that loop, and then change everything and do it again. And that way you built up
Yeah.
tracks. But and that was really cool. And knowing how to program a synth is great. And I think that it's, from a, now that we can have as many tracks as we want or whatever, it's still
Yeah, there's
trying to get to. It's good. You can,
yeah, there's an element that same dynamic with AI kind of exists that you see in a DAW. Like, well, when you're not forced to have to make decisions and make mistakes and you can just kind of boil the ocean. Well, I
but
suppose there's an argument to be made that does kind of stifle kind of what
the problem
you're
is that
how hard your brain's going to have to work.
but the thing is the viewers or listeners or whatever, we're still here. We're still analog. And it's something a friend of mine pointed out years
Mm-hmm.
ago that I still think about a lot when I'm mixing. Because, my favorite part of the mixing process is getting rid of shit. Because, like I'll start making, like put everything in there and it's cool. And then you go back and you're like, okay, I can get rid of all of this except for these, two or three tracks that carry everything. And those guys can come in every once in a while, maybe. But, he said the human brain only follows one vocal instrument at a time. And that really
Yeah.
for me because it was like, okay, well, that means I can have this really cool drum loop, but then that has to go away when the vocals kick in. And that's not going to change. Or with visual art, right? So if you ever want to like impress your friends when you're at an art gallery, here's how you kind of explain dynamics to them. And the reason the whole like dividing thing rule of thirds exists. So
Mm-hmm.
actually, okay, so we're going to look at this picture of me right here talking. A good painting, if you do it correctly, your eye doesn't get stuck on any one thing. So the reason that this actually works well right here is so you're looking at this painting of me right here on the screen. So what immediately happens is it goes right to my nose,
Mm-hmm.
up this little dude, or just going this way, this little dude here,
Yeah.
around there, down those bones, across the bottom, up that white thing, across that top line of yellow there, and then back down. So your eye is constantly moving around the frame. And then it might
Mm-hmm.
knock into some of the other details, but it's always moving. A
Mm.
painting or dynamics will get stuck on one spot and it will stay there. So AI may be able to. This is one of the case scenarios I always think about. Like I own a company. I'm going to advertise. I want to sell my one-sided pink widgets, but I'm going to save money by getting rid of my entire advertising staff. And I'm going to use AI to render up all this stuff, and then I'm going to use that to sell the thing.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that that guy doesn't have the skill set to know about this shit, right?
Right.
So he's going to go, well, this looks fancy and looks slick, and yeah, it looks just like any other advertising. Right, right. Well, but it doesn't because he doesn't understand that thing. So it's like there is a very good reason for maintaining that human element within your structure because you need somebody who knows not just how to make the tool or how to make the thing, how to use the tools, but how that is going to get interpreted to the other person,
Right. Right.
other people.
Yeah.
Which again, I think goes back to if you are an artist or whoever, and you're going to be using these tools, then it isn't cruise control for creativity. It's like you really still like. I love the fact that the mid journey, you say I want this thing, and that gives you four different versions of it, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the point where it actually. And I've made this argument before, and people really don't like it, but it's still true that you are making an aesthetic choice. And if you are making an aesthetic choice with a tool, so you pick the one that you like and,
Mm-hmm.
and refine it and refine it and refine it. And again, every time you do that, it's an aesthetic choice using a tool. That's art. And
Yeah.
I really hate that argument, but that's just like the tool happens to be a computer doing it. But if I were to just do that with a pen and pencil, like draw the thing out and go, yeah, and then fix it a little bit, aesthetic choice, you changed it. So
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I think, I haven't really used AI much for art. That I'm aware of. I guess I'm still pretty analog, at least for audio creation. But I think that point you made about how the cognitive decline that
that's
I
scary.
want you well, you still had you also said the audience is still analog.
Mhm.
And so I do wonder if what's funny is so my daughter's 11 and all the kids in fifth grade are just crazy about Nirvana right now. And obviously it's parents and stuff, passing this music down. When, we were talking about Nirvana earlier. Well, those albums, they're pretty freaking analog, Nevermind sounds amazing, but that was Butch Vig in there, cutting. And I wonder if I think it's easier to create, now than ever.
Mhm.
But I wonder if the noise to signal that the audience will have, will this, I feel like there's almost like a greater, despite, and I'm not knocking Taylor Swift or any of that, but like the fact that music still holds all this gestalt to fifth graders. Because the stuff when I was a kid, like the stuff that my parents listened to when they were younger, I was like, fuck this, you know. But the fact that that resonates with these generations as analog as is, I wonder if there's something to that human factor. Is can't really be, it can be facsimiled with AI, but if you're not in there, like you're saying, making those artistic decisions, and there isn't somebody who's like expressing a real thought through there, it's just kind of a copy, and does that speak to people on the same level or move people the same way songs do? We talk a lot about, do people listen to music the same way as when we were younger? Sean, or we do over at Glitch Mode all the time, and I think they do. I just think there's a lot more noise there's a lot more noise you have to filter through, and I think maybe I'm biased, but I just watch how my daughter processes music and listens to it and thinks about it, and I think what's going to happen is their bullshit detectors are going to get better, and they're going to have to. It's going to be like a Darwin thing, because I think it's not just true in art, but it's true in message. Like we were talking earlier about the AI and vaccine. I mean, people are going to have to get really good bullshit detectors, and I think I'm optimistic when I see my daughter's generation, her friends, like just kind of how they think about it. I'm like, it seems like, okay, a generation this is all they know. They're kind of, they have some inherent things that maybe we had to learn that's just kind of germane to them.
I hope so. I think the thing with the Nirvana Taylor Swift thing is that so I've reached this point in my career, which is really awesome. And I've never really had a problem with this, but now I really, really, really don't care. Um, where like I've been putting out just a ton of stuff, and a lot of it I'm writing.
Yeah, dude.
And and I look at it, as far as I'm concerned, the entire point of art is to speak a truth, whether it's your truth or not. You're hopefully you're into whatever it is, but if it's honest in some way, even if you're not spelling it out, right? Um, I also don't write music for kids. I wouldn't know how to do that if you put a gun down.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I grew up
right.
listening to weird, no, like I was listening to Skinny Puppy at 17 or Big Black or whatever.
Right on.
Like that wasn't for kids. But you look at your kids with talking about Nirvana and stuff, and I think one of the things about Nirvana is that it is rock. That kind of rock, punk rock is it has to be true. It has to be, otherwise it doesn't work. Like,
Right.
and I think for people that are that age, Taylor, I like Taylor. I think she does some really cool shit.
Yeah, but
My
that's
point
music
is,
that's made with a
they
lot
don't
of
have a they don't have a frame of reference yet for the experiences that Taylor talks about, but
true.
have an absolute frame of reference for Nirvana. Because what's like, I love this example of Smells Like Teen Spirit is the perfect pop song, best one ever written, because within 15 seconds, you know exactly what the song's about. Because it goes da, 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 da. So you know that it is about
Yeah.
breaking that barrier, and then
Yeah,
go
yeah.
back to it. So just that alone, I mean, that level of excitement and stuff, like you they don't even have to know necessarily what the song's about to know what the song's about. Like that's one of the things I always loved about Skinny Puppy. Listen to Last Rites, have no idea what he's saying, know exactly what the songs are about.
Yeah, yeah.
But so I think that probably the give them like a couple of years, and now they've had their hearts broken a little bit, or they're starting to have those much more adult feelings that are really beyond just
Mhm.
excitement. That's when I think that sort of appeal will kick in. So I don't think it's necessarily a analog digital thing. I think it's a we're on the verge of changing, and there's a lot of excitement that's innate to that. And I think
Maybe, yeah.
you know,
I kind of wonder too if it's just that I haven't really listened to much just AI music. I know it's out
very
there,
good.
and but I just haven't. But I suspect there's good applications like sound beds and stuff. But
Mhm.
could AI ever replicate I mean, a singer, Tom Waits. I mean, so I'm a big Tom Waits fan, and
I think it
to me,
absolutely could.
some,
Not yet. But yeah, I think it absolutely. I think what we're going to end up with is 50 years or whatever. People aren't going to have favorite artists. There may be an artist as a focal point,
mhm.
but there will be some segment of what is created that will be algorithmically generated, and the artists. Yeah, okay. So you know how like Skrillex was the face of dubstep. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
he wasn't doing anything that anybody else wasn't doing, but the way he was
Right.
put together was and getting in on the ground floor of it was unique, right? So I think what's going to happen is you're going to get the same thing where different artists are going to use the algorithm in different ways to create whatever the thing is that
Yeah.
and so people will be following that. Now, the flip side of that is that every art movement that ever happened because it was a response to whatever the current thing is. And I absolutely believe
Mhm.
that as that happens, you're going to get a bunch of kids in their garages making guitars, playing guitars, making weird ass instruments because it's not that, you know? And so it's always going to be this back and forth between.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a good point. And you know what's funny about that too is when you said things that we just haven't imagined yet. Um, I remember hearing that somebody was another podcast I was listening to where there's a big freak out with cars coming that hey, this was just going to decimate the horse and buggy industry, and what's going to happen, and the assembly line. Well, they had no idea that these things are going to have car stereos and heated seats and all these new things that kind of were spun off of what the auto industry did. And I absolutely believe that. I mean, there are careers, there are kids in school right now are going to have careers that haven't been invented yet.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
that's how I was. I mean, I have a degree in marketing and economics, and I got both those before. I mean, you can go and get a degree in pretty much digital marketing now. That didn't exist when I went to college, and literally everything I do are things that didn't exist when I went to school. You
When I
know.
was in high school, I went to a vocational school for graphic design, and well, I wasn't even graphic design exactly, but and we did literal layout and paste up where you would print out text, that was this big on a strip, this big, and then you take a waxer and you wax it and you attach it to this big thing,
Oh wow.
take a photograph of it so you could get a print of it so you could put it in the book.
Mm-hmm.
2 years later, when I was at Corcoran, all of that was obsolete because Photoshop came out.
Oh yeah, that's a good. Yeah, absolutely. And look at all the wonderful things people do with Photoshop now. It simply couldn't have existed without
Mhm.
that platform.
Right. Right.
Um,
I
yeah,
mean,
that's
every time a new technology comes out, that happens. When photography, when it became, people were able to get cameras, period.
mhm.
When they became popular, all the artists at the time were like, "Oh, that's it. This is the end of art. Why bother painting a
Yeah,
still? Now I get to put photographs on it." You know.
yeah. Oh, for sure.
And like a year or so ago, I was a guest speaker at a high school. Uh, and one of the things that was really cool is the kids were actually doing cyanotype prints. Like it's completely obsolete. Nobody needs to do this shit anymore, but they were learning how to still physically go in, make the print,
Oh wow, that's
do all
cool.
that stuff. Yeah. And like I've had people who've been doing the sky is falling, this is the end of art. And I'm like, it's people make things, it's what we do. Like there's a reason there's still stone sculptors and iron work. People make iron, and because that's
Yeah.
who makes shit. It's so yes, these tools and it's going to have an awful impact, and a lot of people are going to be fucked because of it, and that sucks. I am not at all. I get all of that, and I understand it, and I understand why people are scared of it. But
But
also,
you're right. At the
stop
same
it.
time, this is a continuation of a trend that's existed for thousands of years. Like, do you think I mean, you mentioned that about paintings and cameras, and when you said that, I felt like, boy, that's a lot like the same things I would have thought as a painter in what would that be like the mid 1800s.
Mhm.
probably would be very similar to some of the things artists would feel about a camera now, because those, they wouldn't have, just think of all the things that they wouldn't have known about. You just don't have
Right.
it almost, do you think that camera versus painter, we're kind of at that point?
I think that art changes or develops when the technology to create it comes into existence. So I use music when I think about this a lot. Like rock and roll as we know it couldn't exist without the electric guitar.
100%.
Electronic music couldn't exist without synthesizers. Techno couldn't exist without inexpensive synthesizers, so lots of people could play it and fuck around and screw them up to see what happened with it.
Yes.
Dubstep couldn't exist without granular synthesis. So every step of the way, as we change how we interact with sound, that creates a thing. The other cool part about that is somebody said on this podcast, I don't remember who said it originally, but it was basically whenever you have a new type of medium,
Mm-hmm.
like records or whatever, the flaws that are innate to that medium when you go to the next one becomes something you're actually searching for, like adding record crackles to digital stuff,
Yeah, right.
or tape hiss or whatever to digital stuff,
Sure.
because those things, everything has benefits,
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I was thinking about that's really interesting is I was thinking about how, we all have really great cameras on our phones and we have filters on them. And now we are maybe at least one generation past the time that the people who use those filters are going to know what they're emulating. Like, like,
Yeah. Sepia
I'm adding
tones.
VHS effects. I've never even seen a VHS, but I'm still adding this effect to it,
Right,
which
right.
is pretty cool. Oh, actually, here's a cool example of how techno. So I have this belief that artists by nature are lazy, because, and not in the way that it's commonly used. In order to make a living doing it and doing what I do,
Mm-hmm.
which is pumping out paintings all the time, you have to really get your systems down, learn how to do it quickly. Um, and any tool that you can use to allow you to do that, I often will use a projector and project it up on the canvas, draw it all out, which saves me 3 hours
Yeah.
drawing it, erasing it, drawing it, erasing. So there's a painting, I don't remember what it's called, but it's from the 1500s, and it is one of the you are able to absolutely prove without a shadow of a doubt that the person who did it used a camera obscura to make the painting. So what you do is you have a big room, you put a membrane in the middle, you poke a hole in it, you put your subject on the other side of there. Light goes through, acts like a pinhole camera, focuses through that, goes onto your canvas, and you draw.
Oh, cool.
And the thing about this painting that proves it is that there's this weird black and white shape that kind of goes up at an angle off the bottom of it, and it doesn't make a whole lot of
Mm-hmm.
sense unless you tilt the image and look at it kind of like that, and it foreshortens into a skull. Because,
Yeah, I remember
right? And the
they used to
only
have
way,
in old Guitar Hero magazines, they would do drawings like that in the margins. Yeah.
yeah, and so the only way to accomplish that is by, I mean, I guess you could, in theory, do it if you're that good an artist, but
Just
that's,
imagine it, and yeah.
yeah. So, so, for me as an artist, it's like always looking for those shortcuts, and they're available, and it's awesome to use them as long as they're like guitar effects.
Right.
Point where you stop hearing the guitar and all you see are the effects. And then it sounds like everything else that all you're hearing is the effects. So the trick with being a good artist or cooking is knowing how much spice to put on where you're still tasting the steak.
Yeah.
And,
That's a good example.
so like, yeah, it's just figuring out, or like, I'm not the best singer in the world, but I'm decent. I can hold a tune. But
Sure.
chord, you always want that to be as good as you can make it. So you can go in and you can, and get it all so it sounds really nice and good. And one of the things I've really been playing with a lot is I almost always multi-track my vocals. And so I'll have one that I fixed, and then the other one I'll still let have a little bit of uh, slightly off key or not off key, but just
Yeah, it gives it
or
the depth.
whatever,
Yeah.
just to help it stay alive.
Right.
And so I think that with any of this stuff with AI, when it comes to art, and music and all that stuff. It's finding that balance. And I think that those are the little things to me that will engage people and make it interesting because that's so that way every time you listen to the chorus, it's not the same vocals copied. There's something slightly different about it, and that makes it.
Right. Yeah. It feels like it moves along. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're the same way. Yeah, if you just kind of cut paste everything, you can tell, like you can hear it. So, but it's funny bringing it back to AI and just that whole notion of, I mean, kind of the keeping that human element in everything. I think you're I think it will have to become critical to education that people understand that cognitive thing you're talking about. Because, I'll tell you, I don't know about you, but man, if ChatGPT existed when I was in college, I wouldn't have written a fucking thing. Like I just, and I know that they've got detection and stuff for that now, but there's the laziness aspect, but then there's also like you're saying, like, hey, this is like those are like muscles in your brain that if you don't work them out, they'll atrophy. And
and also there's the long-term effects, like, okay, cool, doctor who went to school while Chat GPT existed.
yeah, like
We're going to be
you want that guy
but
taking
let's
your
really make
amputating your
sure.
foot.
hmm I've got a friend who's a teacher, and they were saying how in order to combat that, they're changing how they do testing, or like
Oh, really?
you have to come up and actually tell the person what you have learned
Yes,
with no
that's good.
notes. So like you just have to come up and say, "This is." When I was in art school, so because of the ADD, and well, actually I don't know if it is, but because of how my brain is, it's got holes in it. It's fucking embarrassing. But I never remember people's names. I don't know why. It's just somebody will say it and follow up. And
I've seen you mention that. Yeah.
when I went to do my art history classes, I went to my teacher. I was like, "Look, this is the problem. I'm not making this up. This is a very real thing. So to compensate for this, this is what I'm going to do. We're going to have questions about specific artists. I'm going to write as much as I can about that artist so you know that I know what I'm talking about, but I will never be able to put their name to it." And that was how I got through art history, was just by kind of going, okay, yes, he's the guy who did this with light,
Oh, wow.
colors. He often did these subjects. Um, and it worked, which was very cool. But yeah, it's that might be another, I don't know, just another method of doing it. But I
Well, I
mean,
really like that idea about being able to summarize things. That's because that's what I mean. I feel like I've lived a little bit of that brain drain myself because I went through about 6 months of just I'm going to crunch all my data with AI, and this is going to take what used to take a week, and I'm going to turn to a half hour worth of work, and I'll spend the rest of that time drumming up new business or whatever. And well, two things happen. One, I ended up taking on more work than I could handle, which that's another issue. But the other thing I found and I learned was, when people start asking questions, or I find myself like having to explain a stat or a metric, and I didn't go through that process of crunching it myself to arrive at it.
mhm.
It makes me feel dumber, and so I think that having to recite that's a good idea. I think that will work, especially for like it's not as creative, but like just business stats classes and stuff. Like, data in my life, data tells a story, and it's a matter of reading the data. What is all this search behavior really telling you, and how do you interpret that? And I need to be the one interpreting that. If I lean that to AI, then first of all, I'm not. I mean, it kind of cuts me out of the value, but like people need that, they need somebody that, kind of implicitly understands kind of what this is telling them. And then they can make decisions about how they're going to spend their marketing dollars or how they're going to think about their product different. But the way I've dealt with it is, I kind of use it for specific things, but then I pull it together and tell the
Right.
story.
And
I don't lean on AI for
we're
that
using it as a
anymore.
tool, and I think that that's the
Yeah.
big fear for so many people, and or that they just aren't able yet to get past their own personal sense of like
Yeah.
attack with it to get, yeah, it's a tool and you can absolutely misuse tools constantly. Like, but
Right.
like, with visual art or whatever, like I can sit down and it's like, even if I said I needed a reference photo, so I use it and reference it and renders it, and that's my reference photo, I can still tell you exactly why I made every single decision on that painting and why I think that, I'm still figuring out, okay, this is how the dynamics work. I'm
Yeah.
colors and doing this specifically because this contrasts this way, and
And the
so
devil's in the details on that stuff too, because like, I think I like like Gibson guitars, like um the ones that are handmade, well, you can see where the guy kind of oversprayed a little bit here or there, and like, those the imperfections kind of make. And I would imagine when you're talking about paintings where you've had to make decisions, and I mean, those things are kind of what makes them living, and AI doesn't really do that.
yeah, but it will. I was thinking about that at one point because one of the points for me that I've tried to make people is like, yes, it's never going to make, you know unique. Okay, so if what's the number one rule of financing is that something that is unique, handmade, has a story, has innately more value than something that is mass produced. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so by that, the fact that I will still continue to be able to sell individual paintings to people even if AI is still out there putting out prints, whatever, cool.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. There's
But
always a part.
I was like, now, but give it 10, 15 years when you're not going to be able to tell the difference because what's going to happen is you're going to have AIs that actually have learned now how brushstrokes work. So the brushstrokes actually make sense. They're not just there as an aesthetic. And then you have somebody who built a 3D paint printer that's going to use the 3D paint printer onto canvas, printing actual brushstrokes, and the entire thing is built with AI to create this physical thing. And you won't be able to tell. Um, which still doesn't mean, okay, cool. If that means part of your job as an artist
Do you think?
is
Let
getting
me
people
ask.
on board.
Yeah, let me ask you this though, because like in painting, I think this is a really interesting point. The art I buy, and I'm definitely not like a hardcore art collector,
And if it's got a good beat and you can dance,
but I buy
perfect.
it. Like I didn't start this way. It used to be I was like, if I'm going to buy a piece, it looks cool. It was at Pier One, and But nowadays, like I find myself, if I'm buying art, I'm buying it because of the artist's story.
That's a huge.
Like here's a good example. I'm in the market. A whole bunch of original Wesley Willis stuff came on the
Mhm.
market, and as a Chicago guy, like I'm like God, and those they're kind of high right now, but I would buy that because of Wesley, and he
Well, that's
made.
the only innate
I
value to it because
Right, but I feel like art. Like if I would buy something from you, I'd buy it because Stephen Archer made it. And do you think that as it just becomes more mass produced to create art, it's gonna make art more accessible. People buy it, and you're gonna get more of these like people who crop up and become fans of original pieces. You know what I mean? I'm trying to. Is that
well, I get what you're
like
saying.
almost kind of like well, you know, for years I had cheap guitars, and through that I learned the value of what cool, valuable ones are. And I wonder if like might that mass. I mean, you're always gonna have the masses who they'll buy the thing that was printed on a 3D printer that AI generated, and there's gonna be a million of those people. But if let's say 1% of those start to seek out art on a more personal level, might this facilitate that more than if that didn't exist at all? I
Um,
wonder that.
I think that as AI becomes more prevalent, the there will be more people that are looking for things that are not mass produced. Uh,
Yes.
but art is people buy art because they like it, but it's also the same reason they buy those little pop figures that they like, right? And they get a whole wall of them or whatever. Because those things, what they're using them for is essentially a way of reflecting, reminding themselves who they are, right?
Yeah.
You buy something because it fits your aesthetic. I like the Aliens franchise. Therefore, I bought all of these Aliens things because I like that. And it reminds me that I like that and it makes me happy. Uh,
Hmm.
so part of making, artwork is there there could very well just be a purely aesthetic reason, like, wow, that really, is beautiful and it speaks to me or whatever. But the additional value, and I've read books on art marketing, and one of the absolute first rules is the story about the piece or the artist. Like that goes a very long way because what it does is it takes this other thing, this kind of holy story that's attached to this thing, and now it's yours. You're buying that story. So now when have people over for dinner, you could say, "Oh, you like that piece? Well, let me tell
Yeah.
you, that artist only has one toe, and everything in his work seems to really stem from this fact that he only has one toe, and it's really about him dealing with that fact. And I really relate to it because I've got one thumb, and so it's that is part of the whole thing. There is a
Yeah.
fantastic video online. I post it from time to time. Jonathan Walk on cons aesthetics, and he's using the covers or using comics to explain cons aesthetics. And the final list, and it's like you can find something appealing or not or whatever. But the final one is this thing called the sublime. And for me as an artist, the idea of the sublime is that you want to create work that is larger than the sum of its parts.
Right.
Like
Yeah, I think I've seen you talk about that and that just that concept. But yeah, I think I've seen you post that video
yeah,
before.
yeah, it's a fantastic video, and I very much feel that, and that's where truth comes comes into it for me, is that if you are creating work that is honest and you feel like it's that when you create something, it's just the experience of making it is so incredibly smooth. You're just like, wow, that just came into existence and with no
Yeah.
real, almost like no real thought on my part. It was just like, da, 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 da. Wow, there it is, as opposed to the whole, why can't I get this proportionally right?
You know what's funny, man? That same thing exists in data analysis. I know it sounds crazy, but
No, absolutely.
I have those same moments where it's like, man, this pattern just writes itself. Like and the business strategy comes alive, and other times where it doesn't. I think maybe it's like that's also kind of my art is taking data
Well,
and telling
it's still
stories.
it's yeah, it's taking something in and putting it back out, and that's my whole gig, my whole job as an artist. I always tell people, I'm like,
Isn't that funny? Like those are pretty. I think anything becomes an art at some point if you have enough kind of you're approaching it that way.
and it's also a good example for why maintaining that human element is in there is important because it's like, yeah, having somebody to who can do that is is a huge thing. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that like um I remember hearing somebody talking about like they needed to solve some sort of computer problem at some big business. He was like, find me the people with the colored hair. You know, those are the ones I need to get in here to
Yeah,
solve the
right.
problem because they're going to do it, right? And so it's with any tools, I think that it's like just because you have a power sander doesn't mean that you can construct this dresser. And so just because you have AI doesn't mean that you understand why a thing works and then can use it properly. You need to have people that really get.
Well, to your point about marketing story, I mean, those are the things that people are relating to. And yeah, I think that's kind of the stuff that artists really need. It's probably why social media now, it's like, I know some people hate the fact that, really, and I know you do a lot of it. I mean, you got to be out there pumping out content and putting yourself out there. And, maybe that's all part of, what differentiates an artist from just kind of an AI thing. But you're right. Some of that'll probably be replicated too. But I really think when I think of artists that I really get into, it's the story and it's those maybe like how they brought whatever they're creating into being may have AI. Like Jim Marcus is a good example of that. A lot of the books he's been writing and a lot of his aesthetics lean a lot on AI, but it's still
It's also a very good
Jim's
example
brain that like is what's crunching this
of part
stuff.
of the problem, though, with it too, is because at one point he was posting all of these AI images of people, and the more he did it, the less him you see in it, because all of a sudden all you're seeing is again the same faces, the same aesthetics. Like
Mm,
Jim might be enjoying the act of creating them, but he was going through and posting them so fast that I don't feel like it lost the himness of it. It was just like, here's another AI thing I did. And you can get kind of high on the act of creating something and seeing something that you made fully rendered.
potentially, yeah.
But
Um,
yeah, if you're not curating it in a responsible way, and you start allowing more and more of these
yeah,
little AI markers, as it were, to pass through, it becomes a very slippery slope. You know.
right, right. No, that's a fair point. But I just, just thinking about how, especially, I mean, it's just because I talk to him more. So I see the guy all the time, but I know kind of what he's doing with like the mecha disco
Oh yeah, yeah.
but
No,
he's really,
I
um,
absolutely 100% believe he is a very sincere artist and got a very specific idea of what he is trying to do. I think that was just kind of, and I do agree
no,
that in
it's
general.
a fair point. And it's probably a good cautionary tale too, that like, hey, you still gotta insert yourself in there because yeah, you can. That'd be a cool movie plot. It probably already is, but you know what I mean? Like, people just kind of getting lost in their creation like that.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. It's getting high on your own supply, like
Yeah,
how exciting it is when you're really in it's why you have to listen to the song the next day, because while you're working on it that night and you're like, oh, this is fucking amazing, and then it's like I'm always happy when I go back the next day. I'm like, oh, okay, this actually still sounds good, and it wasn't
yeah.
just me and my endorphins kind of going, yes, let's do this. So
That's I would say that's one of the biggest influences Sean Payne has been on me is he's very big on that and not like let it sit for a week and
right.
I wouldn't do that and man it's that has absolutely got to be part of the process.
I used to do this thing called gorilla mixing, but like 20 years ago with Wired to the Dead, because you'd work on the thing. And this was before I was competent in what I was doing. So I was so worried about not getting it right. And now it's like I can knock something out and be like, okay, that works. There you go. Because I know
Yeah.
what I'm doing. But at the time I didn't. And so I would do this thing where I would go in and I knew I had no objectivity. So I'd go in and I'd drop the marker at one part of a song randomly, listen for 10 seconds of it and go, is that okay? Okay, cool. Because I knew that if I listened any more than that, I would no longer be hearing it with any sort of objectivity at all.
Yeah.
I would do that over the pace of a week with different songs, trying to hear it. Boy, I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, just yeah, taking break. I mean, listening to things with fresh ears and being objective. It's getting high on it's easy to do that and get lost. And, especially as this stuff makes it easier to create because AI really does. I mean, you can start step one, skip step two through nine and be at 10, and, but like we've been saying earlier, I think kind of steps 2 through 9 those are the things that help really bring the uniqueness of the art, or in my case, like help me be able to inherently really tell the story behind what this stat is telling you, because I've looked at all the different numbers that crunched it to that point.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I really remember that, like when we were talking about the McDonald's thing. I mean,
Mhm.
that whole insight came about because I went down so many wrong paths,
Mhm.
and God, what in the hell do people, and then I started to see, hey, I'm seeing all these patterns for Wi-Fi near me, and they're more volume here for like if I would have just had AI analyze patterns and tell it,
It probably would have thought the
I,
Wi-Fi was irrelevant.
well, yeah, I just don't think I would have arrived at that same conclusion. I wouldn't have been able to say, here's all those other instances and patterns I looked at too that were also out there, for people looking for things near them. But I was able to really,
Mhm.
really kind of get into telling that story to the board at McDonald's about that because I really did kind of live in the data and
Right.
Yeah, it's funny because that's you mentioned that because that really has been something that's been on my mind a lot in the last few months. It's just that's great. I can take a week's worth of work and condense it to 20 minutes, but man, there's so much just kind of ambient knowledge you gain from screwing stuff up a bunch until
Yeah.
you land on the right paths.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And you never also know with that knowledge that like, I always tell people it's like you need to consume as much as you can because you get your one life and that's all you get. Like I live in a world away from reality in the middle of the woods. I've been married 25 years. I don't
Uh,
have the problems of like a coal miner or
yeah,
it's like you want to read as much as you can to kind of get all of these other things in. And as you make mistakes and things like that, they float around kind of off over there. And every once in a while you'll be like, oh, I can take this and this thing and synthesize something else or use it as a jumping off point. So that's one of those ways those mistakes are great because maybe it's not a mistake, it's just not necessarily what you needed. So there may be
right.
a time when the thing that is the thing you need and you've got it
Yeah,
through that whole process.
for sure, for sure. But yeah, I think the whole I guess just talking with you, I guess really some of the stuff we've been talking about with AI and how exciting it is in search, where it's like this is going to open up whole entire new paradigms where people are booking appointments right in a search result or making decisions about a mortgage without ever well, that's going to create whole new um, jobs and opportunities and things marketers will be having jobs for 10 years from now we don't even envision today.
Right.
And I think art follows that same trajectory. It sound as we're talking through it, that's kind of where my head is that well, and I also think it's that William Gibson quote, the street finds its use for the street find I mean people who get high on their own supply will struggle to find an audience, I think, But
Yeah.
I do think it's, a lot of noise to signal that'll happen between
Oh yeah.
now and
Well, it's already, because people are, it's great as an independent artist. It's easier than ever to get your shit out there. Cool, but there's also a billion other people that are doing exactly the
yeah,
same thing. So
yeah.
how is it that how are you able to do it? And what is it that you're, able to bring to the table? And often as much as the quality of the songs comes, it does come down to as an like ego likeness. We have gone out and we've earned every single fan we have by going to those towns and playing for them and saying, hey, this is a thing we make. We think it matters. We would like you to think it matters too. And that goes a long ass way to separating out from that noise, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, we're working on shows too. And just well, you know all about that. The
Yeah.
realities of touring and everything. It's
Right.
just it's a long, long haul.
Yep. Yep. Right on. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me.
Yeah, man. This is I feel like I learned more than I learned more talking to you than you probably learned from me. But
Yeah,
yeah,
no, it's awesome. But when these go live, I'm gonna, if anybody has anything really, really new, because it might be a few weeks still, but where can people
yeah.
find you? And, if they're looking for a guy to do what you do, find you on a professional basis, but also find your bands.
Yeah, I'm Dave McAnally on LinkedIn. I run my own consulting practice at this point, so I definitely can network you with people who are in this business. I think it's a very exciting time to get into search with all the AI. As far as music, derisioncult.com, we just dropped Mercenary Notes Part 2, our EP last Friday, and yeah, man, I'll be out there. We'll be out there promoting it definitely when this goes live. But yeah, thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, and I think I remember when you got because I did a remix for it at one point, and
Yeah, yeah, the
like it's like
sleeves.
industrial Tom Waits, which I think is a pretty
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. We have a yeah. We did another track. It's kind of a call to that.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was an awesome. That remix you did was really. What's funny is that was the one you. And now we're having this conversation. That was my first. We used AI to make a lyric video for that. And that was the first time I ever did that was on the one with you. So how serendipitous it is we're here talking about this
Oh,
now,
that's
right?
awesome. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks a lot, Steven.